Opened her eyes with enthusiasm and pointed her finger at the newlyweds to Dad and said to look at the prince on a black horse and the fairy. The next day, newspapers appeared with headlines: "The Snow-White Princess in the Arms of the God of War," and "Protector Irugo." The wedding parade ended with the loudest exclamations of happiness. The townspeople were delighted at the sight of Mr. Theodore and the famous warhorse. A love story of the rescue of a princess by His Highness, an interview from a townswoman. Mr. Theodore did not let go of the princess for a second. It's so solid and poignant. Why can't her boyfriend be the same? And also the author of Love Like Fireworks has already been nominated for the Journalist of the Year award. The creator of this photo said that he will leave it as a family heirloom and will pass it on from generation to generation. Reading all this news that the newspapers published yesterday, Queen Irugo was shaking with anger and irritation. She asked how a person who wrote something like that could be called a journalist, called them fools, and tore up newspapers asking what they called the wedding of this bastard. The wedding procession reached its destination, but she deliberately came up with various excuses to stall for time and not send the carriage, but it was all in vain. On the contrary, she only received a dissatisfied look from the king, and turning to the queen, Nathan said that there had been a lot of problems in the palace lately. He smiled in her face and pierced her turquoise eyes, said that while busy with external affairs, he did not pay attention to palace issues and asked if she needed help, which meant that he would take her place. Remembering this, the queen angrily threw the cup and teapot off the table, breathing heavily, and the maids shuddered at the sound of broken dishes. The next moment, the chambermaids rushed to the queen and worriedly asked her not to be angry, and her father said that the problem was not only the growing popularity of the prince and the displeased look of the king. But almost no one changed their position when it was decided to enter into a political marriage with the princess from Sylvanus. But it cannot be said that after the banquet he did not strengthen his position by demonstrating his political skill. He asked what she thought. But his daughter abruptly interrupted him and, shouting angrily, said that those who had previously followed them dared to compare them with Theodore. Gritting her teeth, she thought that Theodore had changed, and it was all because of the arrival of this girl, all because of Princess Alexandra. When suddenly Elizabeth ran into the room, she was worriedly calling her mother and holding a newspaper in her hands. She was telling them to look at this article. When Count Samuel told Lisa that they had already seen the news and the queen was now a little unsettled, he told his granddaughter to come back later, but the girl tearfully begged them to look at the article. It was a message that had just been published. There was breaking news in the newspaper. His Highness Theodore and Her Highness the Princess had such a hot wedding night that they broke the bed. The pieces of the bed were preserved by the journalist, and the question was raised, how great is the masculine energy of the protector of Irugo? After reading this news, the queen and her father, Earl Samuel, simply froze in a stupor, completely confused and embarrassed. The queen felt disgusted. But in order to find out whether such an incident really happened, you need to rewind time and return to the evening after the end of the wedding parade. The moment husband and wife went to bed together on their wedding night, Rachel asked Her Highness how she kept her skin so soft and smooth. It's as if she doesn't make any effort, and she just radiates light. But the girl was so tired that she fell asleep right in the bathroom. The girl asked her not to fall asleep. Camilla embarrassedly said that her strength would still be useful at night. Rachel agreed with a chuckle and said that she must be worried. At this time, the princess was tiredly thinking why she should worry, because they were just business partners and wanted to quickly get to a soft bed and fall asleep. When suddenly she confusedly asked why they were touching her there, Rihanna asked Her Highness to let them help her relieve the tension. The chambermaids grabbed the princess and continued to knead the girl's legs with their hands, generally holding her down in every possible way. But Sasha resisted because she was ticklish. But after all the procedures, Alexandra looked at herself in the mirror. The fatigue disappeared as if by hand, and her skin was like a child's. Looking at her face, she said that she was shining like a polished diamond. Rihanna laughed and said that it was too early to be surprised. Handing the princess a nightie on a hanger, they said that they had a secret weapon. The princess turned around in surprise. Her eyes widened when she saw the black, translucent, and obscene outfit. She asked in surprise whether it was even possible to wear such a thing. Of course, Camilla told her. Everyone around is so jealous that any outfit suits her, and Rihanna secretly said that this was Mr. Theodore's choice. The ladies explained that when His Highness was shown catalogs of women's underwear, his gaze caught on it for 0.3 of a second. They say he looked at it at the speed of light. Rihanna said that she is called a fairy, so both black and white colors suit her. Because of this, the palace maids were divided into 2 arguing groups. Camilla said that if she chooses, she will definitely get Theodore. The princess had heard about the diligent preparations for the wedding, but did not expect that they would go and ask Theodore what to choose, even though it was not a choice at all. She thought that they were just professional perverts, so the princess abruptly threw the provided underwear aside and told her to bring her something comfortable. At this time, Theodore went out into the courtyard and walked thoughtfully along the stone bridges of the palace. Finally, he stopped and looked down. The prince thought it was their first wedding night, and he was alarmed. Looking at his reflection, His Highness thought that he did not expect that this marriage would lead his insides into such a mess. The maids unnecessarily provided him with reports on everything right down to his suit, he thought with a blush. Because of this, only empty thoughts came into his head. The prince did not think that he could do this with someone he did not love, or with someone he did not like Alexandra from their first meeting, until this day seemed strange to him. And at the moment when she came into his hall, he of course believed that his soul gave this child everything it could. But if he stays with her, then it will be increasingly difficult for him to remain confident, because they are completely different from Alexandra. He remembered the image of a baby with golden hair. What? The girl suddenly asked. She came on time and invited him to go into the room. The man looking into the water instantly blushed. Still, it was Princess Alexandra. She continued to call Theodore, but the guy still could not turn to her because of embarrassment. Because of the useless chatter of the maids, his imagination ran wild, and he could already imagine how he would turn around and see his wife in that very outfit. But then the princess called Theodore again and asked him if it had been a long day, and suggested that he quickly go to bed. The princess looked absolutely normal, wearing her white, comfortable nightie and smiling at her husband. Confused by his thoughts and the pictures in his head, the man finally turned around and looked at his wife in surprise. He exhaled with relief, blushing, placing his hand on his chest, and joyfully thought that this was not the same nightie. Sasha asked if something was wrong. She apologized to the pervert and asked if he was expecting someone else. The man quickly said no and looked at the princess, and thought that a pleasant aroma emanated from her. Probably after the bath, her cheeks and that white dress were red. And at that moment, Princess Alexandra was thinking about the soft bed, the guy covering his mouth with his hand and turning his reddened face to the side thought that this was even more dangerous. And so the couple approached the room reserved for them for the newlyweds and stopped in a stupor. Even the external decoration of the corridor was decorated in every possible way. The princess told Theodore that his maids are extremely capable, but their zeal is a little strange. The guy said that he was ashamed, but he admits it. But then they opened the door to their room and were simply stunned by what they saw and wondered what it was. The whole room was decorated in red, white, and pink colors. There were flowers everywhere. The table was set for spending time together, and in general, she was simply beaming. Theodore, frowning and pursing his lips, thought that there was a sense of madness here. Especially from this bed, Alexandra asked her husband if he also heard the sounds of romance. There was a heart laid out in petals in the center of the bed, but it was too small for the size of the room. But the next moment, the princess, without waiting for her husband, quickly rushed forward, as if playing Theodore looked at her in shock, and a hair on his head even stood on end. And so Alexandra, already taking off her shoes as she walked, deftly jumped onto the soft bed, hugging the pillow. She pressed her whole body against the lightest bed and thought how good it was, how soft the blanket was here. She thanked for the fact that you can feel something like this in the world. This is 100% silk, and she will never forget their suffering. She will definitely find servants when she opens her own business. However, the princess suddenly realized that the bed was a little too small, and she and Theodore would be cramped. The guy had just approached the bed. He was still in shock from her outburst and could not move away yet. And Sasha considered that the best defense was an attack, and he would not take the bed from her. She would be hers, and, looking menacingly at her husband, told him to sleep on the floor. Puffing out her cheeks in indignation, the princess said that she had made it clear, even before the wedding, she had said that she loved everything soft. It would be cruel of him to take this away from her and force her to sleep on the floor, since he had no objections when she talked about it. Theodore, holding his head, asked to calm down. He asked about her words that she loves everything soft. Then she meant that she wants to sleep on soft things. Alexandra said yes. Then the prince pointed his finger at himself and asked if she then suggested he sleep on the floor. "That's right," said the princess. There was silence. "Damn," the husband thought embarrassedly. She didn't have a single ulterior thought, and he was the only one who imagined so much. It seemed like he was the only one thinking about how their wedding night would go. When Alexandra suddenly realized that because of the soft bed, she had lost her mind for a second and had just told the owner of the palace to sleep on the floor, confused, who was in charge here? And so His Highness the Prince asked in surprise whether the bed was so good. The princess, who had been thinking a little, was suddenly surprised, not understanding the question, but then immediately said yes. Smiling, she said that she was good, because one day she decided that when she got out, she would definitely do it. Then the princess dreamed of washing herself clean and covering herself with a dry blanket in a soft bed and falling asleep. Hearing these words from his wife, the guy was a little so surprised that he opened his mouth slightly at the unexpected words. Afterwards, he remembered how difficult it was for the princess in her homeland, and he felt sorry for her and was very restless in his soul. But after thinking a little, he, embarrassed, sat down on the other edge of the bed. Suddenly, sitting with his back to his wife, he said, looking at the floor, that usually husbands are not laid on the floor. Moreover, on their wedding night, the princess shuddered in surprise, and a blush appeared on her cheeks. The man sat sadly on the edge of the bed as if a faithful dog was waiting for permission from his master. But each of them was thinking about different things. The princess was sorry that it was bad on the floor, and the prince was reproaching himself for what he was carrying. But he was very offended. But suddenly, Alexandra got out of bed and sat down on her knees and thought, "Nothing can be done," and called Theodore. The guy turned around. Then the princess extended her hand to him and said that they could sleep holding hands only. And smiling, her face expressed confidence, and she asked if he believed her, continuing to extend her hand. For one moment, the man's face turned red, and he was surprised. But suddenly, he anxiously asked what she meant, bringing his eyebrows to the bridge of his nose. Alexandra, smiling, said that they could only touch with their hands, and other actions were prohibited. The guy began to massage the bridge of his nose and asked to wait, asking where he heard such a remark. The princess remained silent, puzzledly watching and examining Theodore from behind. When she asked Theodore if he wanted to do this with her, the guy's eyes widened in an instant and his cheeks turned red. He turned sharply to his wife and stammered and told her that absolutely not. Alexandra, smiling, said that she also didn't like this idea, and since they don't want each other, then there's no need to worry. Theodore was even somehow offended. But she drew a clear line, of course. The most important thing in an arranged marriage is the birth of a child in which the blood of two families will be mixed, but it is better to think about children later. Coldly, she said that as his business partner, she was confident that she could make him king even without a child, and all because she has the eye of the emperor, so he must preserve his innocence. Looking at her husband with a languid gaze, she addressed him by name, and smiling after a short pause, she asked if he had a lover. The guy looked at her in surprise. The golden hair of that little girl flashed through her head. The next moment, he frowned and wrinkled his nose, looking ahead with his cold eyes, and asked how she knew. Smiling, Alexandra explained that one glance would be enough for this, and asked not to worry, she understood everything. The princess simply could not help but know when they were boasting like that in front of her. Then the guy, hearing the answer, turned his head away. Turning his head away, he looked sadly at the floor and thought about something, trying to understand his feelings. Suddenly, he realized that from the wedding until now, Princess Alexandra had behaved as if nothing had happened, and he was irritated by dragging along at the same pace as her. "That's right," he suddenly said, still doubting. "This child is his beloved." "This is how," the princess said with interest. An additional point for their negotiations appeared. "What?" Theodore suddenly asked in surprise. And Alexandra said contentedly that although monogamy is practiced in Irugo, it does not apply to the king. She is not greedy for the title of queen, so if he behaves well, she can give it to her. Today's topic of negotiations is the possibility of getting the queen's place at the conclusion of the treaty. She asked, "He also wants her to be not a concubine, but a queen. The offer is not limited, that the most favorable conditions are provided, having let slip about the non-benefits," she said. This angered the guy. Smiling nervously and frowning, he looked at his wife and said what was to be expected from her. Said to forget his words and lay down on the bed, turning away from the girl. All she could do was throw up her hands and sadly climb under the blanket. She asked herself under her breath what she had done wrong. And now they were lying on the bed together. It seemed like progress, but something was still wrong. "By the way," suddenly she told Theodore, "they need to do it so that the others think that they really spent their wedding night. Maybe they will bleed." Theodore explained that in Arugo there is no emphasis on the virginity of the bride. Moreover, it is not necessary that there be blood at the first time. Then Alexandra thought that when she came here, she felt that in some aspects the people of Irugo were more sensible than the Sylvans. However, the better the relationship between the spouses, the higher the public approval, she thought. And again, Theodore's praise. The princess asked if he had ever broken the bed while making love to his girlfriend. The poor prince shuddered at such a question, and after clearing his throat, he stood up and, frowning and looking questioningly at his wife, wondered what she was talking about. Sasha asked why he was looking like that. She just asked, and then she understood and apologized. "Which means he couldn't break it," she said sadly. Theodore blushed, and shocked by such a statement, thought that she thought he was doing something similar with someone, frowned, and embarrassedly said loudly that he was with no one. "You." The princess held out this letter and, upset, said that she expected something else. Looking at her husband's torso, she said with sadness in her voice that looking at his muscles, she thought that this was possible. And patting her husband on the shoulder, she said that in fact it was quite normal that he couldn't break it, because he could get hurt. "Everything is fine," she reassured him. She asked too much. The guy looked furiously at the girl and voiced his thoughts. Emphasizing each word, she said that he could have gotten hurt. The princess was surprised and thought that she had hurt his male pride, so she said sadly that she did not want to offend him. "Oops" suddenly popped out of her mouth when she saw just the truly irritated and angry look on Theodore's face. "And I thought that I was mistaken. I thought that he could do such a thing. That's why I asked. Because he stopped the speeding carriage with one hand, but, on the contrary, it hurt his pride. After all, it's easy to hurt a man's ego in this matter." The princess was thinking about what to do, how she could restore the relationship after a quarrel, when she remembered the help of the emperor's eye. The princess realized that she needed to praise him and smilingly said that Theodore easily breaks the bed. The point here is her ignorance. He can break it into 4 parts, and each of them breaks with a crash, and called the prince the god of the bed. Besides, he is still young and will be able to improve his skills. Waving her arms in different directions, the princess said that she would earn a lot of money and give him a lot of energy. Theodore, looking at her irritably, asked who she took him for. At this moment, some conversations finally stopped. The princess stopped waving her arms. Alexandra said that she thought he was shy, Theodore said rather menacingly, and so they lay down under the blanket again. When His Highness the Prince said that he had never broken a bed, the princess looked in his direction in surprise. But maybe Theodore muttered with some sad intonation in his voice, lying on the edge of the bed and looking out the window. In response to this, the princess did not answer anything, but smiled with pity, raising the tips of her eyebrows. Patting her husband on the shoulder, she said, "Of course, if Theodore gets down to business, he will certainly break her." The guy seriously said that he simply didn't try. Grunting and splitting in half as if she was teasingly encouraging the prince, he asked if she was listening to him at all, and the princess continued to say that Theodore was the best. This struggle was like a man teasing a wild beast. And then Theodore stood up again and looked at her irritably. His whole body trembled, and the veins on his face bulged. How could he, unable to withstand all this bullying, furiously say that he said that, in truth, he could break the bed? The princess just looked at him in surprise, opening her mouth and eyes, and raising her hands as a sign of surrender. The next moment, the prince hit the headboard in anger and hung over the princess lying on the bed. He continued to glare at his frantic wife with a furious gaze from his cold amber eyes, and she continued to look at him emotionlessly with her cold, enchanting amethyst eyes. She called the prince by name, but he did not answer. Then the princess wondered why he suddenly got angry and raised her hand and said to wait. It was too close. The prince pursed his lips in anger and simply froze, coming to his senses. And meanwhile, the princess touched his chest and, shuddering, looked at the torso that was right in front of her eyes. But this pleasure did not last long. Cracks appeared on the headboard of the bed from the blow. "Oh," Theodore suddenly said worriedly, removing his hand from the headboard, and Alexandra only looked in surprise at his hand, from which crumbs were falling. Having learned about this, the maids would have screamed loudly and worriedly, yet they chose this bed so carefully. But they would have been more worried about their highnesses, of course. What was happening, the girl only managed to scream. Carefully, the guy shouted to her, and the next moment she opened her eyes. And the first question that sounded in her head was what had just happened, and now she was lying on her husband and realized that they were on the bend of the mattress. The bed simply broke in half, and Alexandra asked loudly, since the bed was broken, "Where should they sleep now?" Theodore said guiltily that he did not intend to break it. But the girl didn't give up and indignantly asked her partner, "Then who did this?" "Which means she definitely had to break in the process, incredibly," she said admiringly. He just released his powerhouse for a second, but the next moment Theodore said menacingly, "No, he just didn't try. If he tried, he would break it, hitting her husband's legs." The princess said that he is a master of speech, without even trying. "What?" His Highness, the prince asked indignantly. "What if he did? But try, you can provocatively," she said. Theodore shouted that he would really do it. Sasha shouted at him to try. Finally, this argument stopped, and the newlyweds calmed down and climbed out of the trap. With a sad sigh, the princess said that she wanted to sleep in a comfortable crib. Theodore, scratching his head, suddenly looked down and discovered the mattress that they had pulled out earlier. Picking it up, he placed it in a more convenient place in front of her and told his wife to sleep here. Looking down, he said that the frame had broken, but the mattress itself was not damaged, and wondered out loud where the maids had found such a mattress. If these lovely ladies were here, they would sadly and with tears in their eyes say that they asked you to trust them, but did not want such a result. As the princess watched her husband spread the bed, she asked where he would spend the night. While folding the blanket, Theodore, turning his back to his wife, tiredly said that he could sleep on the floor. The princess looked at him in surprise, and how depressed he acted made her feel sad. Theodore indeed looked very depressed because of this situation, but continued to concentrate on making the bed. Seeing this, Princess Alexandra became not only sad, she felt ashamed of such behavior. She looked at her husband with pity, pursing her lips. There was deathly silence in the room. Alexandra completely dropped her hands from sadness, but then she guiltily called her husband by name. And turning around, Theodore saw in front of him how the princess put one hand on her chest, extended the other to him, and said that she had said earlier that they could sleep with only their hands touching. Theodore accepted his wife's invitation and, placing his hand on hers, said that he still wanted to ask where she learned this expression. Sitting comfortably on the mattress, Alexandra asked if others didn't say a similar line on their wedding night. The prince asked in surprise what kind of remark, and the princess realized that it was not necessary in response, sitting closer to the lady. He only smiled in response to her stupidity. She really is an unusual girl, thought Theodore, and that's how they fell asleep safely, holding each other's hands tightly. Lying on the prince's arm and falling asleep, the princess thought that it was her first time sleeping with someone and gradually fell into a drowsiness, a wonderful feeling. As if the warm rays of the sun were caressing her, the princess walked through an amazing forest and said that there were a huge number of fresh buns on the tree. She saw so many baked goods for the first time. "Sasha, try us too, and not just the cookies, that's right. Don't stop at just one," the buns told her. Suddenly, with all her joy and anticipation, she heard someone's bitter cry. Kolobok said that he wanted to be a delicious bun, but it wasn't soft enough, so he couldn't join in with the goodies. This surprised the princess, and she looked at it with interest. She thought that this white bread definitely came out of a children's fairy tale. Then she thought about it and realized that she had only tasted black bread, and she wondered what such snow-white bread tasted like. Drooling began to flow from her mouth, and Alexandra, realizing that she could no longer hold back, grabbed the talking bread. "What are you doing?" he asked. The princess replied that she was told that if you knead the bread, it will become softer. The bun said that this is about the mixing stage, but the girl said that there was a feeling that he was becoming more and more elastic and continued to knead the bread. He asked to let him go, drooling in fascination at the food. Alexandra said that it was very big and warm. It felt good and its texture was so attractive. She continued to knead the elastic bread, and without stopping to say under her breath what a warm and inviting aroma it had, suddenly her mouth filled with saliva. But the embarrassed bread, taking advantage of the moment, quickly slipped away. Reaching out with her hand, the girl shouted at him not to leave. She hadn't even tasted a piece. Suddenly, she caught the jumping bread right in the air and bit it sharply. The bread screamed loudly in pain. But then, morning came. The princess opened her eyes and found that she was lying with her head on the floor and her body on the mattress, and the pillow was lying somewhere nearby. Stretching, she realized that it was a dream. But of course, it was a pity. But the dream was filled with joy. The soft bed was truly the best. When she turned her head towards her husband, who was sitting with his back to her, she waved her hand and wished him good morning. But suddenly she realized that something was wrong with the guy, looking at him with a languid, questioning look and asking what was wrong with him. The prince, whose face was completely red like a tomato, looked at her with pitiful eyes, biting his lip and arching his eyebrows and covering his chest with his hands. The girl, worried and excited but still not really understanding what had happened, remembered the buns from her dream. She reached out to Theodore, but the guy abruptly moved further away from her and looked all red menacingly. The princess asked in surprise why he was looking at her like that. Blushing in embarrassment, he turned his head away and reminded her that she had said that they would sleep holding only hands. The princess, not understanding what was happening, asked if she had let go of her hand in her sleep, so he was offended and thought that, contrary to expectations, a lot of effort must be made for this man. The prince indignantly asked whether she was pretending or not. He doesn't understand. He looked menacingly at his wife, still continuing to blush. And then he shouted that she said that they would sleep and only hold hands. He asked if she forgot how she touched his chest all night. She became numb. When Alexandra arched her eyebrows, put her hand on her chest and exhaled, smiling and asked, she told him that this was impossible. Then she noticed spots and a bite on her husband's chest and asked what kind of mugs they were, but suddenly fell silent. The smile had not yet left her face, but everything in her eyes swam and became cloudy when she began to realize what she had done. The next moment she jerked sharply and stood in an unnatural pose. It was a character trait that could not even be imagined. Theodore, still hugging his chest and not looking into his eyes, said that it was not in vain that they say that you cannot trust people who claim that they will only hold hands. Waving her hands anxiously and worriedly, Alexandra said that this was a misunderstanding and explained that it was all a dream and not malicious intent. You're lying, the prince told her. And to subsequent excuses, he simply didn't answer anything. And after that, she apologized for a long time.